Deep in the jungles of Central America, a civilization once rose that measured time with the stars, built pyramids taller than the trees, and vanished into mystery. This is the story of the Maya, a people of kings and farmers, warriors and astronomers, who turned dense rainforests into thriving cities. From their humble origins in scattered villages, they created great centers like Tikal, Palenque and Chichén Itzá, leaving behind towering temples, intricate calendars and a legacy written in stone. In this journey we will travel through their dawn, when the first cities emerged, and witness the classic age, a time of cosmic order, divine kings and fierce rivalries. We will explore the wars that burned across the jungle, the rituals that shaped their faith, and the ball games that echoed through sacred courts. As centuries passed, the great cities fell into silence, yet the Maya spirit endured. From the rise of Chichén Itzá in the north to the arrival of the Spanish conquerors, from the flames of conquest to the survival of their language and traditions, the Maya story is one of resilience, brilliance, and mystery. Even today their descendants walk the same lands, speak the same tongue and honor the same ancient roots. Join us as we uncover 10 chapters of history, myth, and discovery, from the beginning to the Maya of today. Subscribe now and embark on this epic journey through time, and let the story of the Maya civilization unfold as you sleep, learn, and dream of a world long lost yet never forgotten. Long before the towering pyramids of Chichén Itzá pierced the jungle canopy, before the great cities of Tikal and Palenque thrived with kings and astronomers, the Maya world was a land of dense forests, winding rivers, and scattered villages. The origins of the Maya civilization trace back thousands of years, long before written history, in a region we now know as Mesoamerica, stretching across present-day Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, El Salvador, and parts of southern Mexico. Here, in this rich and fertile land, a people began to shape a way of life that would one day give rise to one of the most fascinating ancient civilizations on Earth. Archaeologists trace the earliest signs of the Maya to small farming communities around 2000 BCE. These early groups were not yet building cities or carving stone monuments. Instead, they lived close to the land, cultivating maize, beans, squash, and chili peppers, the sacred crops that would remain the backbone of their diet for millennia. Life revolved around the cycles of the seasons and the movement of the sun and stars. Over time, these small settlements grew more complex, with communal centers, early religious structures, and trade routes connecting them to other Mesoamerican cultures. The roots of Maya civilization were not isolated. They absorbed influences from their neighbors. The Olmec to the west, often called the mother culture of Mesoamerica, played a key role in shaping early religious and artistic traditions. Through trade, ideas spread, the concept of kingship, ceremonial ball games, and the sacred calendar system. Yet even as they borrowed, the Maya developed their own distinct identity, language, and worldview. By the pre-classic period, around 1000 BCE, the foundations of Maya culture were taking form. Farming improved with advanced techniques like slash-and-burn agriculture and raised fields, allowing larger populations to thrive. Small villages began to gather around ritual centers, where early rulers, part priests, part chiefs, conducted ceremonies to honor the gods and ensure fertility. These ceremonies often included offerings of jade, obsidian, and even early forms of blood sacrifice, reflecting the belief that life and death were interconnected, and that human blood could nourish the gods. Religion and cosmology played a central role from the very beginning. The Maya believed the universe was structured in layers: the heavens above, the earthly plane where humans lived, and the underworld known as Xibalba beneath. Great ceiba trees, with their massive roots and towering branches, symbolized this connection between the realms. Early myths spoke of hero twins, maize gods, and creators who shaped humanity from corn dough. These stories, passed down through generations, became the foundation of a rich spiritual tradition that would later be recorded in texts like the Popol Vuh. As centuries passed, the Maya heartland began to witness the first monumental constructions. By 750 BCE, places like Nacbi and El Mirador in the northern Guatemalan lowlands featured large ceremonial platforms and pyramids, some rising high above the forest floor. These were not yet full cities, but they marked the transition from simple villages to organized centers of power. Here, the earliest dynasties began to emerge, ruling not just through force but through their ability to mediate between the gods and the people. The landscape itself shaped their development. The Maya lived in a land of contrasts. Fertile lowlands rich with resources, highland valleys with volcanic soils, and coastal plains opening to trade by sea. Rivers and sinkholes, known as cenotes, provided vital water sources and became sacred portals to the underworld. Trade networks expanded, carrying salt, jade, cacao, obsidian, and exotic feathers across hundreds of miles. These networks not only brought wealth but also ideas. Mathematics, astronomy, and early hieroglyphic writing systems began to spread. Family and community life in these early periods revolved around agriculture. Homes were simple, thatched roof structures built of wood and mud. Daily tasks included tending to crops, grinding maize into dough for tortillas and tamales, and weaving textiles. Children were often taught to farm, craft, or apprentice in religious roles. Despite their modest means, the early Maya had a deep sense of identity tied to the cycles of nature, the phases of the moon, and the turning of the seasons. By 400 BCE, the pre-classic Maya had laid the groundwork for what would become a flourishing civilization. Their cities were growing, their religious rituals were codified, and their leaders claimed divine right through elaborate ceremonies. The first glyphs, early forms of Maya writing, began to appear on pottery and stone. This script, one of the most sophisticated in the ancient world, would later allow them to record dynastic histories, astronomical tables, and mythic narratives. The rise of the Maya was not a sudden explosion but a gradual unfolding, like the opening of a great jungle flower. Over nearly 1,000 years their culture adapted, absorbed, and innovated. They learned to read the heavens with astonishing accuracy, predicting eclipses and charting the movements of Venus. They developed a calendar system that interwove solar, lunar, and ritual cycles, a reflection of their belief that time was not linear but cyclical, a great wheel of creation and renewal. In these beginnings, we see the seeds of everything that would follow: the grand cities, the powerful kings, the cosmic wars, and the enduring mysteries. The Maya did not emerge from nowhere. They were farmers who became astronomers, villagers who became city builders, storytellers who became historians. Their world was shaped by the jungle, the gods, and the stars, and from these roots, a civilization would rise that would one day rival the greatest on earth. As we leave the dawn of the Maya behind, the jungle whispers of what is to come. Cities that scrape the sky, dynasties that rise and fall, and a people who, even in the face of collapse and conquest, would never truly disappear. For in their language, their rituals, and their descendants, the Maya spirit endures, unbroken, timeless, and ever-present in the lands where it was born. The pre-classic period marked the first great rise of Maya civilization. Between 1000 BCE and 250 CE, scattered villages grew into towns and towns became cities. The foundations of later greatness were laid in this long era. It was a time of slow but steady change. The early Maya were farmers, hunters, and gatherers. They cultivated maize, beans, and squash. They fished in rivers and hunted deer, peccary, and birds. They lived close to the land, respecting the cycles of rain and sun. Over time their villages grew larger. More people meant more food was needed. Farmers developed better tools and methods. They cut fields in the jungle, drained swamps, and built raised platforms to protect crops from floods. As agriculture became more productive, surpluses appeared. Surplus food meant not everyone had to farm. Some people became artisans, traders, or priests. Society started to divide into roles. Leaders emerged. Some were chosen for their wisdom, others for their ability to organize and protect. Over generations, families of leaders became elites. These early elites built the first ceremonial centers. They were not yet great cities of stone, but they were impressive for their time. Platforms of earth and stone were raised above the jungle floor. Wooden temples were placed on top. Ritual fires burned. Priests prayed to the gods for rain and good harvests. Religion played a central role. The Maya believed the world was alive with spirits. Gods of maize, rain, and sun were honored with offerings. The ceiba tree symbolized the connection between the heavens, the earth, and the underworld. Caves and cenotes were seen as sacred entrances to the spirit world. By 600 BCE, trade networks began to grow. Obsidian from the highlands, jade from distant valleys, and salt from the coast moved along jungle routes and rivers. Canoes carried goods across lakes. Traders linked the lowlands and highlands, spreading ideas as well as objects. Settlements like Nakbi and El Mirador in the northern Petén region of modern Guatemala began to flourish. They show the earliest large-scale Maya architecture. El Mirador, in particular, would later become one of the largest cities of the ancient world, even before the Classic period began. In this pre-Classic time, Its massive platforms and early pyramids started to rise from the jungle. The pre-classic Maya developed their first calendars and writing systems. Early glyphs appear on stele and pottery. Timekeeping was vital. The cycles of the sun, moon, and Venus guided planting and ritual. Priests became astronomers, reading the sky to predict the future. Life for ordinary people remained tied to the land. Families lived in simple homes made of wood and thatch. They cooked on open fires. Children helped in the fields. Markets were lively places where maize, cacao, and handmade goods were exchanged. As cities grew, so did competition. Powerful centers sought to control trade and tribute. Some alliances formed, but rivalries also emerged. Fortifications appeared in some places, a sign that conflict was not unknown. By the end of the pre-classic, around 250 CE, the foundations of the classic Maya world were firmly in place. Cities were growing. Rulers claimed divine power. Writing and mathematics were developing. The great story of the Maya had entered a new phase. The pre-classic was not a time of sudden wonders. It was a slow dawn. Villages became towns, towns became cities, and the jungle began to hold monuments that would stand for centuries. The people who started this journey could not know the heights their descendants would reach. But they lit the first fires of a civilization that would shape Mesoamerica. The classic period of the Maya civilization began around 250 CE and lasted until about 900 CE. This was the time when Maya culture reached its greatest achievements. Cities grew larger. Pyramids rose higher. Kings ruled with divine authority. Art, science, and writing flourished. At the heart of this era were the great cities. Tikal, Calakmul, Palenque, Copan, and many others became powerful centers. Each city was ruled by a king, often called the Keuhulaja, or Holy Lord. These kings claimed to be chosen by the gods. Their rule was both political and spiritual. The cities were not united under one empire. Instead, they formed a network of rival kingdoms. Alliances were made and broken. Wars were fought for control of trade routes, tribute, and prestige. Some cities rose while others fell. Architecture reached new heights during this time. Pyramids were built with precise stonework. Palaces housed noble families. Ball courts hosted ritual games. Stelae were carved to record victories, rituals, and the lineage of kings. Each monument told a story. Religion shaped every part of life. The Maya believed the cosmos had three layers: the heavens, the earth, and the underworld. Gods ruled each level. Kings were seen as intermediaries between people and the divine. Bloodletting rituals, where rulers offered their own blood, were common. It was believed this act nourished the gods and kept the world in balance. Astronomy became highly advanced. Maya priests tracked the movements of the sun, moon, and planets. They predicted eclipses and seasonal changes. The calendar system reached its full form. The long count calendar allowed them to record history over thousands of years. Writing flourished. The Maya script, made of glyphs, became one of the most sophisticated writing systems in the ancient world. It recorded myths, royal lineages, and historical events. Scribes painted books on bark paper called codices. Only a few have survived, but they reveal a rich tradition of knowledge. Daily life for most people remained tied to the land. Farmers produced maize, beans, squash, and cacao. Artisans created pottery, jade ornaments, and elaborate masks. Markets were busy places where goods from different regions were exchanged. Social structure was strict. At the top were kings and nobles. Below them were scribes, artisans, and traders. Farmers made up the majority. Slaves, often prisoners of war, worked in the fields or as servants. Warfare was a constant feature. It was not only about territory but also about capturing prisoners for sacrifice. Victorious kings displayed captives in public ceremonies. These rituals were meant to show power and please the gods. Art and sculpture reached a high point. Walls were painted with vivid murals showing rituals, battles, and myths. Carved lintels and altars told stories of kings and gods. The Maya had a unique style that combined natural detail with spiritual symbolism. By the late classic period, some cities became dominant. Tikal and Calakmul fought for supremacy in the central lowlands. Palenque and Copan developed rich cultural traditions in the west and south. Chichén Itzá began to rise in the north, setting the stage for the post-classic era. The classic period was also a time of connection. Trade networks stretched across Mesoamerica. Obsidian, jade, salt, cacao, and feathers moved between regions. Ideas about religion, astronomy, and governance traveled with them. For the Maya, time was sacred. Every action was tied to cycles of the calendar. Major events were planned according to the movements of celestial bodies. Kings often claimed their actions repeated those of mythic ancestors. Despite the achievements, the seeds of decline were already present. Population growth strained the land. Rivalries between cities led to long wars. Droughts became more frequent in some regions. The balance between people, gods, and nature began to falter. By 900 CE, many great cities in the southern lowlands were abandoned. But during the Classic period, the Maya world was at its brightest. It was an age of kings and cosmos, where stone cities rose like mountains from the jungle, and where time itself was measured with a precision unmatched for centuries to come. The Maya Classic period was not only about art, science, and great cities. It was also an age of conflict. Wars shaped the destiny of kingdoms. Alliances built power, but rivalries often brought ruin. From 250 to 900 CE, warfare became a central force in Maya life. Maya cities were independent. There was no single empire. Each city had its own ruler, court, and army. Yet they were connected by trade and culture. This connection often turned to competition. Cities fought to control trade routes, resources, and tribute. Rivalry created cycles of war that lasted for generations. One of the greatest rivalries was between Tikal and Calakmul. These two cities dominated the central lowlands. Each tried to expand its influence over surrounding cities. Sometimes they formed alliances with smaller centers. At other times they fought directly. Their conflict became a struggle for supremacy across the Maya world. Wars were fought for many reasons. Territory was important. Controlling fertile land and trade paths meant wealth. Tribute from conquered cities added to a ruler's glory. But war also had a sacred meaning. Capturing enemies for sacrifice was seen as a duty to the gods. Kings claimed their wars kept the cosmos in balance. Armies were made of nobles, warriors, and commoners. They used obsidian blades, spears, and atlatls to throw darts. Warriors wore padded armor and elaborate headdresses to show their rank. Battles were often fought near borders or ceremonial centers. Victory brought captives, loot, and prestige. Maya warfare was often ritualistic. Kings led their armies in person. The capture of an enemy ruler was a great triumph. Such captives were displayed in public and often sacrificed during grand ceremonies. These events were carved into stone monuments. Stele recorded dates, victories, and the names of defeated kings. Alliances played a major role. Cities formed networks of allies through marriage, diplomacy, or shared enemies. These alliances could last decades or collapse overnight. Tikal at times allied with cities like Palenque. Calakmul created its own network, including Caracol and Dos Pilas. These shifting ties made the political map of the Maya world complex and unstable. Trade was also tied to war. Control over trade routes meant power. Cities near rivers, coasts, or key jungle paths became strategic targets. Salt, cacao, jade, and obsidian were valuable goods. Controlling their flow enriched cities and financed their armies. Religion and war were deeply connected. Kings claimed the gods supported their campaigns. Victories were celebrated with bloodletting rituals and offerings to deities like Kawil, the god of lightning and war. Defeats were seen as signs of divine displeasure. Priests advised rulers on when to attack based on the calendar and the stars. The wars of this time left their mark on the land. Fortified cities with defensive walls became more common. Some centers were abandoned after defeats. Others grew into powerful regional capitals. The rise and fall of cities followed the rhythm of war and alliance. Palenque in the western lowlands is a good example of a city caught in these struggles. It fought with rivals like Tanina and Yaxcalan. Its rulers built alliances but also faced invasions. The famous King Pakal the Great maintained Palenque's power through both diplomacy and defense. In the southern regions, Copan became a center of culture and science. Yet even it was drawn into war. Its rulers expanded their influence but also suffered defeats that shook their dynasty. The Maya world was rarely at peace for long. As wars continued, the burden on ordinary people grew. Farmers supplied food for armies. Craftsmen made weapons and armor. Tribute demands increased. Some cities thrived on war while others declined under its weight. By the late Classic period, war became more destructive. Long campaigns drained resources. Alliances turned into betrayals. Cities that once flourished began to collapse. The rivalry between Tikal and Calakmul weakened both. Their struggle left room for other powers like Chichén Itzá in the north to rise. Despite the violence, the Maya continued to create art, record history, and honor the gods. Wars were not endless chaos. They followed rituals and codes. Yet they shaped the fate of kings and the map of the Maya world. The stars watched over these wars. Maya priests believed celestial events influenced victory and defeat. Eclipses, the movements of Venus, and the cycles of the moon guided war plans. Some battles were launched only when the sky gave a favorable sign. By 900 CE many great cities were weakened. The wars that once built power now contributed to decline. Fields lay abandoned. Trade routes shifted. Populations moved. But during the height of the classic period, war was not just destruction. It was also a way to show strength, gain wealth, and fulfill what rulers believed was a sacred duty. The story of the Maya cannot be told without their wars. These conflicts created heroes and tyrants. They built alliances and broke them. They carved monuments and toppled thrones. Through war, the Maya connected the earth to the stars, believing each victory and defeat echoed in the cosmos. This age of power struggles and shifting alliances set the stage for the next era. Cities would fall, but their ruins would remain, covered by the jungle, waiting for a time when their history would again be read. The classic Maya world, once vibrant with towering pyramids and bustling cities, began to change in the 8th and 9th centuries CE. What had been an age of power and achievement started to unravel. The decline did not happen overnight. It unfolded over generations, city by city, region by region. In this first part, we explore the roots of the crisis and the early signs of collapse. The Maya had built a civilization deeply connected to the land. Their agriculture relied on maize, beans, squash, and cacao. Fields were cut from the jungle, terraces built on hillsides, and wetlands drained for farming. For centuries, these methods fed a growing population. Cities like Tikal, Calakmul, Köpen, and Palenque flourished. But prosperity brought pressure. More people meant more demand for food, water, and wood. Forests were cut faster. Soil was worked harder. The balance between people and nature grew fragile. Droughts struck the Maya lowlands several times during the late Classic period. Evidence from lake sediments and cave stalagmites shows prolonged dry periods. The Maya depended heavily on seasonal rains. With less rain, reservoirs dried, crops failed, and hunger spread. Cities that relied on nearby water sources struggled to survive. Warfare intensified. Rival cities fought over dwindling resources. Tikal and Calakmul, the great rivals of the central lowlands, weakened each other through decades of conflict. Smaller cities chose sides, were conquered, or abandoned their alliances. Trade networks broke down. Goods that once flowed freely, obsidian, jade, cacao, and salt, became harder to obtain. Political systems began to falter. Maya kings were seen as divine rulers whose duty was to ensure cosmic order and agricultural fertility. When droughts came and wars drained the land, people questioned their leaders. Ceremonies continued, but their power faded. Some kings increased tribute demands to fund wars and temples, further straining their subjects. Archaeological evidence shows declining monument building in many regions. Stelae became fewer, inscriptions less detailed. Cities that once raised massive temples stopped major construction. Palaces fell into disrepair. Murals show fewer scenes of triumph and more depictions of ritual and suffering. The southern lowlands, once the heart of Maya civilization, were among the first to feel the crisis. Cities like Köpen in modern Honduras and Quirigua in Guatemala saw power struggles and eventual decline. Population density dropped. Farmers left their fields and moved away. Religion changed in this era of uncertainty. Bloodletting rituals became more frequent, perhaps as desperate attempts to appease the gods. Captive sacrifices increased. Priests read the stars and calendars, searching for reasons and remedies. But the rains did not return as before, and the wars did not end. Despite these hardships, not every region collapsed at once. The Maya world was vast, stretching from the Yucatan Peninsula to the highlands of Guatemala and Chiapas. While some cities declined, others like Chichén Itzá in the north began to rise. This shift marked a change in the centers of power rather than a total end of Maya culture. Migration was one response to crisis. People left failing cities for areas with more reliable water or less conflict. Abandoned plazas were reclaimed by the jungle. Temples that once echoed with music and prayers became silent stones wrapped in vines. Trade routes adapted, but they could not fully restore the wealth of the classic era. Coastal trade gained importance as inland roads became dangerous. Canoes carried goods along the Caribbean and Gulf coasts. Some elites managed to maintain their status by controlling these routes, but the old order was breaking apart. The first phase of the collapse was not only environmental or political. It was also psychological. The belief in kings as divine mediators was shaken. The social contract, food for tribute, order for loyalty, began to fail. Communities turned inward. Local leaders replaced great kings. By the end of this phase, around the 9th century CE, many once great cities of the southern lowlands lay abandoned or severely weakened. The jungle began to reclaim them. Yet the Maya people did not vanish. Farmers still tended maize. Traders still moved along rivers. Villages still practiced rituals. But the grand urban world of the classic Maya was fading. This first half of the decline sets the stage for the deeper unraveling to come, a time when fire, famine, and migration would reshape the map of the Maya world. The smoke of burning cities would rise as a sign of an era ending. The second stage of the classic Maya collapse unfolded between the late 9th and 10th centuries CE. It was a time of dramatic upheaval. Cities that had survived the first wave of crisis faced new challenges. The decline deepened. By this time, many central lowland capitals had already fallen. Tikal, once a mighty city, saw its palaces crumble and its causeways overgrown. Calakmul, its great rival, fared no better. The rivalry that had defined Maya politics for centuries left both weakened. With their decline, the network of alliances they controlled also dissolved. In some places, violence marked the end. Archaeologists have found burned palaces, smashed monuments, and hastily abandoned homes. Warfare became less about ritual capture and more about destruction. Refugees fled these cities, carrying their traditions to new lands or merging into surviving settlements. The northern Yucatan Peninsula became a center of renewal during this phase. Cities like Uxmal and Chichén Itzá grew in power as southern centers fell silent. These cities adopted some classic traditions but also developed new styles. Chichén Itzá, for example, incorporated influences from central Mexico, blending them with Maya heritage. In the highlands, some communities remained stable. They adapted their farming to changing rainfall patterns and traded with emerging northern centers. Yet even here, the shadow of decline was felt. Populations were lower, monuments smaller, and royal authority weaker. The collapse also reshaped culture. The elaborate long count calendar used in the classic period became less common in inscriptions. Instead, new counting systems appeared. Old dynasties disappeared, and new rulers without ancient lineages rose to power. Why did the collapse happen? Scholars agree it was not one cause but many. Drought was severe in parts of the lowlands but not everywhere. Overpopulation strained the land, but some areas were still fertile. Wars drained cities but trade continued elsewhere. The true cause was a combination. Environmental stress, political fragmentation, and social upheaval reinforced each other until the system could no longer hold. The people who lived through this time adapted in different ways. Some moved to coastal regions. Others joined emerging centers like Chichén Itzá. Many continued their traditions on a smaller scale. Rituals survived in villages even when great temples fell silent. By the end of the 10th century, the classic world was gone. The once dense cities of the southern lowlands were empty. Jungles swallowed their plazas and ball courts. The stone faces of kings stared from broken monuments at forests where only howler monkeys called. Yet this was not the end of the Maya civilization. It was a transformation. The Maya would continue in new forms, in the post-classic cities of the Yucatan, in the highland towns of Guatemala, and later under colonial rule. Their language, myths, and calendar never vanished. Even in the time of collapse, threads of continuity endured. The smoke of the classic collapse was not the smoke of total destruction. It was the smoke of change, harsh, painful, but not final. The Maya people survived. Their descendants still live in the same lands today, carrying memories of kings and cities now hidden beneath the forest. This second half of the decline closes the chapter on the classic era. It was an ending filled with struggle but also with resilience. Out of ruins, new centers would rise, and the story of the Maya would move into its next age. The classic Maya world had begun to crumble. Great cities in the southern lowlands lay abandoned, their plazas silent, their rulers gone, and their scribes no longer carving the histories of dynasties. Yet in the northern Yucatan, a new era was beginning. Chichén Itzá, a city already centuries old, began to rise as the leading power of a changing Maya civilization. Its story is one of renewal, adaptation, and far-reaching influence that connected distant lands and reshaped the political map of Mesoamerica. The northern Yucatan Peninsula was different from the humid southern jungles. Here, the land was drier, the rivers rare, and the people relied on cenotes, natural sinkholes that provided precious water. Chichén Itzá, named after the mouth of the well of the Itzá, grew around such a sacred cenote. It had long been a center of pilgrimage, but in the centuries following the southern collapse, it transformed into a thriving metropolis that attracted traders, warriors and pilgrims from across the Maya world and beyond. Archaeological evidence suggests that the city underwent a massive rebuilding during this period. Stone roads, known as sakbiab, linked distant parts of the city and extended outward to other settlements. Massive plazas were designed to hold thousands, and temples rose with distinct architectural styles that reflected both old Maya traditions and new influences, possibly from central Mexico. The most famous of these is the pyramid known as El Castillo, or the Temple of Kukulkan, with its four-sided stairways aligned to the equinox sun, creating a serpent-like shadow that slithered down its steps twice a year. Trade flourished as Chichén Itzá became a hub of commerce. Obsidian from highland Guatemala, cacao from the lowlands, jade, feathers, and salt all moved through its markets. Merchants from faraway regions came by land and sea, using the ports along the Yucatan coast to deliver their goods. The city's location allowed it to dominate both inland and coastal trade routes, giving it a level of economic power that few Maya cities had achieved before. Religion played a central role in its rise. The city became devoted to Kukulkan, the feathered serpent deity, whose cult may have been inspired or influenced by Quetzalcoatl of central Mexico. Rituals were grand and often dramatic, involving offerings of jade, gold, and even human sacrifices to the sacred cenote. Pilgrims traveled long distances to leave offerings in its deep waters, believing they were gifts to the gods who controlled rain and fertility. The ruling structure of Chichén Itzá was complex. Unlike the divine kingship that dominated the classic period, power here may have been shared among a council of elite lineages, merchants, and warriors. This collective style of governance allowed the city to be more flexible and enduring, especially in a time when traditional royal dynasties elsewhere were failing. Evidence of this can be seen in the diversity of its monuments. Ball courts, warrior temples, and merchant halls all reflect a society not ruled solely by a single king but by a coalition of powerful interests. One of the most iconic features of the city was its great ball court, the largest in Mesoamerica. Here, ritual ball games were played not only as sport but as acts of cosmic drama, sometimes ending in human sacrifice to appease the gods. The carvings on its walls depict warriors, captives, and mythological scenes, reminding all who entered of the city's might and its spiritual connection to the cosmos. Militarism also played a crucial role. The Temple of the Warriors and the adjacent Thousand Columns complex suggest the presence of organized military orders, possibly influenced by Toltec traditions. Some scholars believe that Toltec groups from Tula, a city in central Mexico, may have established alliances or even briefly ruled Chichén Itzá, blending cultures and creating a hybrid style that defined the city's golden age. As Chichén Itzá expanded, it extended its influence far beyond the Yucatan. Tributary towns sent goods and regional centers acknowledged its supremacy. The city became a place where politics, religion, and trade merged into a single powerful network that controlled much of northern Maya territory. Its leaders, whether kings or councils, balanced diplomacy and conquest, forging alliances through marriage, tribute, and shared religion. This period also marked a flourishing of art and science. Astronomers charted the movements of Venus, architects designed structures aligned with celestial events, and artisans crafted exquisite works of jade, shell, and obsidian. The city was a beacon of knowledge and cultural synthesis, drawing from its Maya roots while embracing new ideas from distant lands. However, this golden age was not without tension. As wealth concentrated in Chichén Itzá, rival cities grew resentful. Internal factions, warrior elites, merchant guilds, and priestly orders competed for dominance within its walls. Yet for a time, the city managed to maintain its supremacy, its markets bustling, its temples gleaming, and its influence spreading across the peninsula. The rise of Chichén Itzá represents one of the most remarkable stories of resilience in Maya history. In the shadow of collapse, a new center emerged that redefined what it meant to be Maya in the post-classic world. The city stood as proof that the civilization had not died but transformed, adapting to new realities and continuing its cultural legacy in innovative ways. By the late 10th century, Chichén Itzá was at the height of its power. It had become a magnet for trade, a sanctuary for pilgrims, and a fortress for warriors. Its name was spoken from the Caribbean coast to the highlands of Guatemala. But as history often shows, power attracts both admiration and envy, and the very forces that built its greatness would one day challenge it. As Chichén Itzá entered its peak, the city evolved into a cosmopolitan center, unlike any that had come before in Maya history. The Northern Renaissance was not merely about rebuilding stone structures but about forging a new identity in a post-collapse world. The city's layout reflected both practicality and symbolism. Roads radiated from its heart, connecting sacred temples, marketplaces, and residential compounds. The sacred cenote remained the spiritual center, a gateway to the underworld where priests offered sacrifices to Chak, the rain god. Dancers, drummers, and orators gathered during festivals, their voices echoing across the limestone plains. A unique feature of Chichén Itzá was its openness to foreign influence. While many Maya cities of the classic period were insular, this city embraced the sea. Merchants brought turquoise from the American Southwest, copper bells from the Gulf Coast, and fine cotton textiles from distant lands. Canoes traveled along the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico coasts, turning the Yucatan into a crossroads of cultures. Political alliances were crucial to this success. The rulers of Chichén Itzá, whether a council or a single dynastic line, formed strategic marriages with neighboring lords. Tribute flowed into the city, cacao, honey, feathers, and salt filled its warehouses. This wealth funded massive construction projects, including the observatory or El Caracol, where astronomers mapped the heavens with remarkable precision. The feathered serpent Kukulkan became a symbol of this cosmopolitan spirit. His image adorned the Great Pyramid, and his mythology connected heaven, earth, and the underworld. Twice each year, during the equinoxes, the sun's angle cast a serpentine shadow upon the steps of El Castillo, drawing thousands of onlookers who believed they were witnessing the descent of the god himself. Chichén Itzá was not just a place of worship and trade, it was a stage for power. The Temple of the Warriors displayed scenes of conquests, captives, and divine battles. Columns carved with marching figures suggested a military class with far-reaching authority. Ballgames continued to be both entertainment and ritual, reinforcing alliances or punishing rivals. Yet the seeds of decline were present even at this height. Internal rivalries simmered beneath the surface. Factions competed over access to trade routes, tribute, and sacred spaces. The very diversity that made Chichén Itzá powerful also made it fragile, for it relied on a delicate balance of cooperation among many interests. Environmental pressures also began to mount. Periodic droughts threatened agriculture, and overpopulation strained the limited water sources of the northern Yucatan. Farmers had to clear more land for maize, while the city demanded ever more tribute to sustain its festivals, its armies, and its growing urban population. By the early 12th century, this balance began to unravel. Rival centers such as Mayapan and Uxmal gained strength, forming leagues and coalitions to challenge Chichén Itzá's supremacy. The city that had once thrived on alliances now faced betrayal and rebellion. Battles erupted, trade networks shifted, and the great plazas that once hosted festivals of unity became arenas of conflict. Despite these struggles, Chichén Itzá did not vanish overnight. It remained an important pilgrimage site, and many of its temples continued to be used for centuries. Its influence lingered in art, religion, and architecture across the Yucatan. Travelers, including Spanish chroniclers, would later marvel at its ruins, recognizing its greatness even in decay. The story of Chichén Itzá is thus a story of adaptation and transformation. In an age when much of the Maya world was collapsing, this city found a way to thrive at least for a time. It harnessed trade, embraced foreign ideas, and redefined governance to suit a changing era. It stood as a bridge between the classic past and the colonial future that would one day arrive. As the Northern Renaissance faded, the lessons of Chichén Itzá endured. That power is rarely eternal, that adaptation is a key to survival, and that even in times of upheaval, new centers can rise from the ashes of the old. The city's stones still whisper of that age, a time when the feathered serpent ruled the skies, the markets bustled with riches, and the northern plains of Yucatan were the heart of the Maya world. The fall of Chichén Itzá did not mean the end of Maya civilization. Rather, it marked another turning point in a long and resilient history. In the centuries that followed, the Maya world entered what historians call the post-classic period, a time of shifting alliances, revived cities, and evolving traditions. While the splendor of the classic age faded, new centers arose, and the people adapted to changing circumstances with remarkable persistence. One of the most prominent cities of this era was Mayapan, located in the northern Yucatan Peninsula. After the decline of Chichén Itzá, Mayapan rose to prominence as the head of a regional league, often called the League of Mayapan. This alliance included cities such as Uxmal and other towns scattered across the peninsula. Together, they sought to create a stable political network, balancing trade, tribute, and shared religious traditions. Mayapan, however, became the dominant member, and for nearly 2 centuries it exerted control over much of the north. Mayapan's architecture reflected both continuity and change. The city was smaller and more compact than Chichén Itzá, with tightly packed buildings enclosed within defensive walls. Its temples and civic structures echoed the style of its predecessor but lacked some of the monumental scale. The ruling class here was made up of noble lineages, merchants and warriors, and its government operated in a more collective manner than the divine kingship of earlier centuries. Trade during the post-classic period remained vital. Maya merchants traveled by land and sea, carrying obsidian, jade, salt, cacao and textiles across Mesoamerica. Coastal ports such as Isla Cerritos served as hubs for maritime commerce, linking the Yucatan to distant lands including central Mexico and even the Gulf Coast. The Maya were skilled navigators, their canoes traversing the Caribbean waters and the Gulf of Mexico with goods and news. Religion continued to shape daily life. While the ancient gods were still worshipped, some cults gained greater prominence, especially that of the feathered serpent, Kukulkan, and the rain god, Chak. Ceremonies were held in plazas and temples, with offerings of incense, jade, and occasionally blood sacrifice to ensure fertility, rain, and stability. The sacred calendar remained in use, guiding agriculture, rituals, and political events. Despite the achievements of the post-classic period, it was also a time of instability. The League of Mayapan eventually fractured due to internal rivalries and external pressures. Noble factions fought for supremacy, trade routes were contested, and alliances shifted frequently. By the 15th century, the League collapsed in a violent civil war, leaving the region fragmented into numerous small city-states, each ruled by its own lord or council. In the highlands of Guatemala and the southern Maya regions, other centers thrived during this era. The Kich Maya established their kingdom in the western highlands, building their capital at Camarcach, also known as Utatlan. Here, a new kind of statecraft emerged, with rulers balancing military strength and diplomacy to control trade routes connecting the Pacific coast with the interior. Neighboring peoples such as the Kakchakal and Mam formed their own polities, often allying or warring with the Kich, depending on the shifting political winds. The post-classic period also witnessed the production of important historical and mythological texts. Among the most famous is the Popol Vuh, the sacred book of the Kich Maya. This text preserved the creation myths, heroic legends, and genealogies of their lords, blending ancient traditions with the realities of the post-classic world. It reveals a civilization deeply aware of its past yet navigating a complex and often violent present. Military conflict was a defining feature of this age. Cities built fortifications and warriors played a central role in politics. Captives were taken not only for ransom but for ritual sacrifice, reinforcing the cosmic order through offerings of blood. The ballgame continued to hold ritual significance, often tied to warfare and diplomacy, symbolizing the eternal struggle between life, death, and the gods. Even amid turmoil, the Maya demonstrated resilience. Agricultural systems adapted to changing climates, including periods of drought. Farmers used terraces, raised fields, and sophisticated irrigation to feed their cities. Markets remained active, and artisans produced fine works of art, including polychrome pottery, jade ornaments, and feathered garments that reflected both continuity with the past and innovations of the time. By the eve of European contact, the Maya world was a mosaic of small kingdoms, each with its own rulers, rivalries, and traditions. No single power dominated as Chichén Itzá once had. Instead, the region was dynamic, its people still deeply tied to their heritage while responding to new challenges. Spanish chroniclers would later describe this era as one of fragmentation, but for the Maya, it was another chapter in a long story of adaptation. The post-classic Maya were not a people in decline as earlier historians once believed, but a civilization in transformation. Their cities may have been smaller, their kings less absolute, yet their culture endured. Their calendars continued to guide the seasons, their languages thrived, and their gods received offerings in temples old and new. The shadows of their former glory stretched across the Yucatan, not as a memory of failure but as a foundation for survival. As the post-classic period unfolded, the Maya adapted their political and social systems to the new realities of a fragmented landscape. Power was no longer concentrated in a handful of great cities but dispersed among dozens of smaller polities. Each sought to secure trade routes, defend its territory, and forge alliances with neighbors, yet the memory of great centers like Chichén Itzá lingered, shaping both ambition and fear. The city of Mayapan, though eventually destroyed, left a legacy of centralized control through alliances. Its walls, still standing in ruins, bore witness to a time when diplomacy, commerce, and military strength could create a semblance of unity across the northern Yucatan. After its fall, the region entered a period of what scholars call the late post-classic, marked by even greater decentralization. In this era, the Maya's relationship with the sea grew increasingly important. Coastal cities such as Tulum on the Caribbean shore rose to prominence as fortified ports. Tulum, with its cliffs overlooking turquoise waters, became a gateway for trade with distant lands. Its walls protected merchants and nobles, while its temples honored the diving god, a deity associated with commerce and the sea. Trade networks reached remarkable distances. Maya canoes carried salt, honey, cacao, and textiles to the islands of the Caribbean, the shores of Honduras, and even as far as central Mexico. In return, they received copper, obsidian, and new goods that enriched their markets. The sea became the lifeline of the post-classic world, connecting dispersed communities in ways the classic lowland roads once had. Religious practices also adapted. While traditional deities remained central, some cults took on more militant or protective roles in a world of shifting alliances. The feathered serpent Kukulkan continued to be venerated, especially in coastal and northern regions, while the maize god remained a universal symbol of life and sustenance. Pilgrimages to sacred sites persisted, with people traveling to cenotes, caves, and mountain shrines to leave offerings. The Maya also refined their knowledge of astronomy and timekeeping during this period. Observatories tracked the movements of Venus and the sun, which held great significance for warfare, planting, and ritual. Priests interpreted these cycles to determine auspicious days for trade expeditions, battles, and royal ceremonies. The famed Dresden Codex, one of the few surviving Maya books, likely dates from this time and contains complex astronomical tables. Life for ordinary Maya people in the post-classic period involved a balance of continuity and change. Farmers cultivated maize, beans, and squash using techniques adapted to local environments. Communities organized around markets, with barter remaining the main form of exchange. Social hierarchies persisted, with nobles, priests, warriors, and merchants forming the upper classes, while commoners, artisans, and laborers sustained the cities through their work. Conflict was frequent but often ritualized. Wars aimed to capture rather than annihilate, with captives serving as pawns in diplomacy or as offerings to the gods. Fortifications became common, from stone walls to elevated citadels that could resist raiders. Yet even in war, trade rarely ceased entirely, for commerce was the lifeblood of these city-states. By the time the Spaniards arrived in the early 16th century, the Maya world had been shaped by centuries of adaptation. Cities like Tulum still stood, their walls facing the Caribbean, while inland centers maintained traditions stretching back millennia. The arrival of Europeans would soon introduce new forces, disease, steel, and Christianity, that would transform the region forever. But in the post-classic era, the Maya were not a people awaiting conquest. They were active participants in a vibrant, interconnected world. One of the most remarkable aspects of this period was its cultural resilience. Despite political fragmentation, the Maya languages flourished. Art continued to evolve, incorporating new motifs while preserving ancient forms. Weaving, pottery, and codex making reflected a living tradition, passed down through generations. Festivals honored ancestors, gods, and heroes of the past, linking communities across the peninsula and highlands. The post-classic Maya thus stand as a testament to survival. In the shadows of their former empires, they forged new identities, maintained sacred practices, and navigated a complex network of alliances. Their story challenges older narratives that saw this time as merely a decline. Instead, it was a dynamic era rich with innovation, struggle, and continuity. As night fell over the Yucatan and the stars shone above the ancient cities, the Maya continued to read the heavens, plant their fields, and tell their stories. Their shadows stretched far into the future, shaping the world that the Spanish would one day encounter, and leaving behind a legacy that endures in the languages, rituals, and communities of the Maya people today. The dawn of the 16th century brought a force to the shores of the Maya world unlike any they had faced before. For centuries, the Maya had endured cycles of rise and fall, war and alliance, drought and renewal. But now, sails appeared on the horizon, carrying men clad in steel, bearing weapons of iron and thunder, and preaching a faith unknown to these lands. The Spanish conquest of the Maya would not unfold in a single campaign but as a long, drawn-out struggle spanning nearly 2 centuries. The first contacts between the Maya and Europeans were tentative and accidental. In 1511, a Spanish shipwreck off the Yucatan coast left survivors stranded near what is now Quintana Roo. Some were captured by Maya lords, with most sacrificed, while a few, most notably Gonzalo Guerrero, assimilated into Maya society. Guerrero became a respected warrior and advisor, marrying a local woman and raising a family. He is remembered as a symbol of cultural blending, even as others prepared to invade. Formal Spanish expeditions soon followed. In 1517, Francisco Hernández de Córdoba sailed along the Yucatan, encountering fierce resistance from coastal Maya towns. 2 years later, in 1519, Hernán Cortés passed through while on his way to conquer the Aztec Empire. The Maya observed these strange newcomers with caution, at times trading, at times fighting. They could not yet know that these early expeditions were only the beginning. Unlike the swift fall of the Aztec capital, the conquest of the Maya was slow and fragmented. There was no single empire to topple, no central ruler to capture. The Maya world in the early 16th century was a patchwork of independent city-states, each with its own rivalries, alliances, and enmities. This political fragmentation both hindered and aided the Spanish. It made conquest a long process, but it also provided opportunities to exploit divisions. In 1527, Francisco de Montejo was granted the rights to conquer Yucatan. His first campaign was disastrous. The Maya resisted fiercely, using the dense jungles and difficult terrain to their advantage. Spanish soldiers, unaccustomed to the climate and harassed by guerrilla attacks, suffered heavy losses and were forced to retreat. Yet Montejo and his family would return, determined to subdue the region. Over the next 2 decades, the Spanish employed a strategy of gradual encroachment. They established fortified settlements, forged alliances with some Maya factions against others, and introduced European diseases that devastated local populations. Smallpox, measles, and influenza spread faster than any army, killing tens of thousands and weakening the ability of Maya communities to resist. By the 1540s, much of the northern Yucatan had come under Spanish control. Cities such as Mérida were founded atop ancient Maya sites. The Spanish imposed the encomienda system, granting colonists the right to extract tribute and labor from local people. Catholic missionaries, particularly the Franciscans, arrived to convert the population, building churches over temples and replacing idols with crosses and saints. Yet resistance did not end. Many Maya communities retreated into remote regions, continuing their traditions and waging periodic uprisings. The southern lowlands and highlands remained beyond full Spanish reach for decades. In Guatemala, the Spanish led by Pedro de Alvarado fought brutal campaigns against the Kich, Caxical, and other highland groups, often using one faction to defeat another. Cities were burned, nobles executed, and survivors forced into new colonial towns. The spiritual conquest was as significant as the military one. Friars learned the Maya languages and produced dictionaries, catechisms, and chronicles. Some sought to preserve aspects of Maya culture, while others, like Diego de Landa, infamously burned codices and idols in an effort to eradicate the idolatry of the people. This destruction erased vast amounts of history, though fragments survived in hidden manuscripts and oral traditions. Despite the violence, the conquest was never absolute. In many regions, the Maya adapted, blending Catholic rituals with their own traditions. Saints became linked with ancient deities, and Christian festivals merged with the cycles of the agricultural calendar. Resistance also continued in subtle forms, through migration, hidden worship, and revolts that erupted for generations to come. The first phase of the conquest thus set the stage for a long period of colonial domination but not total annihilation. The Maya people endured, their identity reshaped yet not erased. Their cities might have fallen under Spanish flags, their rulers replaced by encomenderos, but in the forests and highlands, in villages and family traditions, the old ways found ways to survive. The story of the Spanish conquest of the Maya is therefore not one of swift conquest but of prolonged resistance and adaptation. It was a war of ambushes, negotiations, epidemics, and cultural confrontation, fought in jungles, on coasts, and across highland plateaus. For the Spaniards, it brought new lands and labor. For the Maya, it marked a turning point that would challenge every part of their world, yet not break it. As the decades passed, Spanish control over the Maya regions deepened but remained uneven. The conquest of the northern Yucatan was followed by campaigns in the Petén, the dense lowlands where some Maya polities still held out. Among them was the Itzá kingdom, centered at Tayasal on the shores of Lake Petén Itzá. This city, rich with trade and steeped in tradition, resisted Spanish authority for more than a century after the fall of central Mexico. The Itzá maintained their independence through diplomacy, trade, and strategic geography. Surrounded by lakes and forests, their capital was difficult to approach and even harder to hold. They maintained contact with other Maya groups and even with Spanish missionaries, but they resisted full submission. It was not until 1697, almost 200 years after Cortés first sailed past the Yucatan, that Tayasal fell to Spanish forces under Martín de Ursúa. This marked the symbolic end of the Maya conquest, though resistance and rebellion would continue for centuries. The methods of conquest evolved over time. Early campaigns had relied heavily on brute force, massacres, burning cities, and executing leaders. Later, the Spanish increasingly used treaties, forced relocations, and religious conversion to assert their dominance. Missions were established deep in the forests, and pueblos were created to concentrate the population for easier control and taxation. Christianity spread unevenly but persistently. Monasteries and churches replaced temples, and friars worked to suppress traditional rites. Yet the Maya worldview proved remarkably resilient. Many communities adopted Christian saints while secretly venerating their own gods beneath the surface. Festivals were timed with ancient solar and agricultural cycles, and stories of old heroes were retold in new forms. Economically, the conquest transformed the region. Tribute systems replaced traditional exchanges, forcing many communities into debt and labor obligations. Haciendas spread across fertile lands, producing henequen, maize, and cattle for Spanish markets. The coastal trade that had once connected the Maya to distant lands now served colonial interests, linking Yucatan to Havana, Seville, and beyond. Militarily, the Spanish presence remained contested. Rebellions erupted repeatedly, most notably the caste war of Yucatan in the 19th century, long after the formal conquest had ended. In this prolonged conflict, Maya rebels fought for autonomy and land rights, establishing independent communities in the forests that resisted Mexican and European forces for decades. These uprisings were the legacy of centuries of resistance that began during the first encounters with the conquistadors. Culturally, the Spanish introduced new tools, animals, and ideas. Horses, cattle, and iron reshaped daily life. Spanish and Maya languages intermingled, creating a bilingual society in many regions. Written records in Latin script preserved fragments of ancient myths, as priests and scribes adapted their traditions to survive under colonial oversight. Codices were destroyed, but others were hidden, some resurfacing centuries later to tell their stories. The conquest also brought profound demographic change. Epidemics decimated populations, reducing some areas by as much as 80 to 90% within a century. Families were torn apart, villages abandoned, and sacred sites left in ruins. Yet the Maya adapted, reorganizing their societies, intermarrying with newcomers, and creating a hybrid culture that endures to this day. By the 18th century, the Spanish crown had established firm control over the Yucatan and highland Guatemala, but this control was administrative rather than cultural. The Maya maintained their languages, their weaving patterns, their agricultural techniques, and much of their identity. The Spanish conquest thus became less an end than a transformation, one that imposed new rulers but could not erase an ancient heritage. When travelers and explorers arrived in the 19th century, they found Maya ruins swallowed by jungle but still revered by local communities. Legends of Kukulkan, Chak, and the hero twins persisted alongside Catholic prayers. The memory of resistance lingered in the names of places, the rhythms of festivals, and the whispered stories passed down through generations. The Spanish conquest of the Maya was therefore a story of both destruction and endurance. It shattered cities, burned codices, and enslaved thousands, yet it also produced a resilient cultural synthesis. Fire and cross reshaped the Maya world, but beneath the new order the old roots continued to grow. Today, the descendants of the Maya number in the millions across Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras. They speak their ancestral languages, practice traditional crafts, and celebrate a calendar that once measured the turning of empires. The conquest may have changed their world forever, but it did not erase their place within it. After the Spanish conquest swept across the Maya lands, the great cities that had once dominated the lowlands and highlands stood silent, their temples half claimed by the forest and their palaces turned to ruin. Yet the fall of the Maya kingdoms was not the end of the Maya people. In the shadow of empire they endured, adapted, and survived. The 16th and 17th centuries were an age of imposed rule, heavy tribute, and foreign religion, but they were also an age of quiet resistance and cultural resilience. When the Spanish dismantled the political centers of the Maya, they replaced them with colonial towns and mission churches. Cities like Mérida rose upon the ruins of older Maya centers such as Though, while Santiago de Guatemala claimed its place among the highland trade routes. The encomienda system demanded forced labor and tribute. Maize, honey, cacao, and textiles were extracted from the villages, leaving many communities impoverished. Yet beneath this new order, Maya traditions did not vanish. Village councils still operated, elders still passed down stories, and rituals survived, often hidden within Christian festivals or adapted to them. The friars who came with the conquistadors sought to convert the Maya to Christianity. Churches were built atop old plazas and idols were burned in public fires. The most famous destruction came at the hands of Bishop Diego de Landa in 1562, when he ordered the burning of countless codices and sacred images in Mani, Yucatan. To him, these were works of the devil. To the Maya, they were centuries of knowledge lost to the flames. Yet even Landa, who destroyed much, also recorded much. His accounts of the Maya calendar and glyphs would centuries later become vital clues for scholars trying to understand this lost script. Throughout the colonial period, revolts and uprisings flared. The most famous in the early era was the rebellion of Jacinto Canic in 1761, a Maya leader who led a brief uprising against Spanish rule in Sistile. Though the rebellion was crushed and Canic was executed, his memory became a symbol of Maya resistance. Earlier revolts had erupted in places like the Petén and the Chiapas highlands, showing that conquest was never absolute. Remote forests and rugged mountains often served as shelters for communities who rejected colonial control. Maya adaptation was not only about resistance, it was also about survival. Over time, many communities adopted aspects of Spanish culture while preserving their own. The Catholic saints were often equated with ancient deities, and church festivals were timed to coincide with traditional agricultural rites. Maya languages continued to be spoken across the Yucatan, Chiapas, Guatemala, Belize, and western Honduras, even as Spanish became the language of administration and law. Agriculture continued to define Maya life in the colonial era. Maize fields, milpas, and cacao groves fed the population, while trade routes shifted to serve the needs of the empire. The old obsidian trade diminished, replaced by European iron tools. Horses, cattle, and new crops such as wheat were introduced, altering the landscape and diet. Yet, in the highlands terraced fields remained, and in the lowlands, slash-and-burn cycles continued much as they had before. By the 18th century the colonial order seemed firmly in place, but cracks were appearing. The Bourbon reforms attempted to extract more wealth from the colonies, raising taxes and tightening control. In the Yucatan, Guatemala, and Chiapas, this increased burdens on indigenous communities already living at subsistence levels. Many began to migrate, abandon old lands, or retreat deeper into forests where Spanish influence was weak. As the 19th century dawned, the world of the Maya changed once more. The Spanish Empire was weakening and revolutionary movements swept across the Americas. When Mexico and Central America moved toward independence in the early 1820s, the Maya found themselves caught between old colonial masters and new national elites who were often just as exploitative. The dream of freedom did not immediately bring relief. Instead, new taxes, land seizures, and forced labor continued under the banners of independent republics. The most dramatic eruption of Maya resistance in this new era came with the Caste War of Yucatan, 1847 to 1901. Sparked by heavy taxes, land encroachments, and cultural repression, the Maya rose in a massive rebellion against the Mexican state. Villages joined forces, seizing towns and driving out settlers. For a time, the Maya controlled nearly the entire peninsula, forcing the government to retreat to a few coastal strongholds. At the heart of their resistance was the talking cross, a religious and cultural symbol said to speak to the rebels, guiding them in their struggle. Though eventually defeated through a long war of attrition, disease, and foreign intervention, the Caste War showed the enduring strength of Maya identity and their capacity for organized resistance centuries after the conquest. Elsewhere, in Guatemala and Belize, Maya communities navigated shifting colonial and national policies. In Belize, British logwood and mahogany traders often exploited Maya labor and land but rarely controlled the interior completely. In the Guatemalan highlands, forced labor on coffee plantations became common in the late 19th century, pushing many Maya into cycles of debt and poverty. Yet their languages, clothing, and customs survived. Festivals continued to mix Catholic saints with ancient rain gods, and traditional weaving, pottery, and maize cultivation passed from generation to generation. The 20th century brought new challenges and opportunities. Land reforms, revolutions, and civil wars swept the region. In Guatemala, the mid-century saw periods of reform followed by brutal military repression, often targeting indigenous communities. Tens of thousands of Maya were killed or displaced during the Guatemalan Civil War, 1960 to 1996, a tragic echo of centuries of marginalization. Yet, in the aftermath, Maya cultural revival movements grew stronger. Bilingual education programs emerged, ancient glyphs were rediscovered and taught, and traditional ceremonies were openly practiced once again. Tourism and archaeology also reshaped the Maya world. Sites like Tikal, Köppen, and Chichén Itzá became UNESCO World Heritage landmarks, drawing millions of visitors. While this sometimes led to exploitation and commercialization, it also brought pride and economic opportunity. Maya guides, artisans, and historians began telling their own stories, reclaiming the narrative that had long been told by outsiders. Today, the Maya are not relics of the past but living nations spread across 5 modern countries. Their population numbers in the millions. Languages like Kich, Yucatec Maya, and Quechua are still spoken widely. Traditional dress is worn in many villages, especially by women whose hand-woven huipiles carry symbols passed down for centuries. Rituals honoring maize, rain, and the sacred calendar continue, often side by side with Catholic Mass or evangelical gatherings. In the political arena, Maya activists have fought for land rights, cultural recognition, and autonomy. The Pan-Maya movement in Guatemala, the Zapatista uprising in Chiapas, and indigenous councils in Belize and Honduras all represent this continuing struggle. They are heirs to both a great civilization and a long history of survival under conquest and colonialism. Thus, the echoes of the ancient empire are not silent ruins. They live in language, ritual, and memory. The pyramids may be wrapped in forest vines, but their builders' descendants walk among them, telling stories that span millennia. From the pre-classic rise to the classic glory, from the Spanish conquest to the modern revival, the Maya story is one of persistence. A people who, despite fire, cross, and empire, still count the days by the sun and stars of their ancestors. In the 21st century, the Maya are not an echo of history, they are a living, dynamic people. Across Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, Guatemala's highlands, Belize's river valleys, western Honduras, and parts of El Salvador, more than 7 million Maya continue to shape their identity amid the modern world. Their story is not only one of ancient pyramids and lost cities, but also of languages spoken in bustling towns, traditional textiles worn in markets, and ceremonies performed under both the cross and the ceiba tree. The modern Maya world is a mosaic of continuity and change. Cities like Mérida, Campeche, and San Cristobal de las Casas bustle with commerce, education, and tourism, yet surrounding them lie villages where life still follows rhythms tied to maize planting, rainy seasons, and sacred festivals. In many of these communities, the Maya calendar, long suppressed, has experienced revival. Achkaijab, or daykeepers, once forced into secrecy, now openly guide ceremonies that honor the sun, moon, and stars. Language remains one of the strongest markers of identity. Over 30 Maya languages are spoken today, from Yucatec Maya in the north to Kich, Quechua, and Mam in the Guatemalan highlands. In many villages, children grow up bilingual, speaking both their ancestral tongue and Spanish. In Belize, English mixes with Quechua and Mopan, creating a rich cultural blend. Schools now offer programs in Maya languages, a change from past centuries when indigenous speech was punished or erased. Modern Maya life is a balance between tradition and the pressures of globalization. Young men and women migrate to cities for work or education, bringing back mobile phones, internet access, and global music to their home villages. Yet many also return to help with the milpa, to celebrate the harvest, or to weave the same motifs their ancestors did. Huipiles, traditional blouses woven by women, carry ancient patterns. Diamonds for the universe, zigzags for rain, and stylized birds for divine messengers. Tourism has become a major part of the Maya economy. Sites like Chichén Itzá, Tikal, and Palenque draw millions of visitors each year. Guides, many of them Maya, lead tourists through temples that once hosted royal coronations and cosmic rituals. Artisans sell hand-carved jade pendants, embroidered fabrics, and cacao drinks prepared in the old way. While this brings income, it also raises questions. How much of the heritage is being preserved and how much is being packaged for foreign eyes? Religion today is equally layered. Catholicism remains strong, often blended with ancient practices. Saints' days coincide with old agricultural festivals, and churches host processions alongside offerings of copal incense. Evangelical Protestantism has grown, bringing new forms of worship that sometimes clash with traditional ways. Meanwhile, a Maya spiritual resurgence has gained strength, reclaiming sacred sites for fire ceremonies, solstice celebrations, and the reading of the Tzolk'in sacred calendar. Politics and activism have also shaped the modern Maya experience. In Chiapas, the Zapatista uprising of 1994 brought global attention to indigenous rights. In Guatemala, Maya leaders have fought for land restitution, bilingual education, and political representation. Maya women in particular have risen as community leaders, educators, and healers, challenging both colonial legacies and modern inequalities. Amid these changes, the scars of history are still visible. Many Maya regions suffer from poverty, land dispossession, and the lingering trauma of conflict. The Guatemalan Civil War left deep wounds, with mass graves still being uncovered and survivors still seeking justice. Migration to the United States and other countries has become a common path for economic survival, often splitting families across borders. Yet the sense of identity endures. Festivals like Henal Pixin in Yucatan, Day of the Dead, Rabin Ajah in Coban, Maya Queen Pageant, and the solstice gatherings at Eximsh draw together the threads of ancient and modern. They are moments when the ancestors are remembered, the land is honored, and the future is envisioned. The Maya of today are also becoming storytellers of their own past. For centuries, their history was told by outsiders, Spanish chroniclers, European explorers, and foreign archaeologists. Now, Maya scholars, filmmakers, and writers are reclaiming the narrative. Radio stations broadcast in Kitch, documentaries are produced in Keki, and online platforms share teachings about glyphs, astronomy, and traditional medicine. Archaeological discoveries continue to reshape understanding of the ancient world, often with Maya involvement. LiDAR technology has revealed vast networks of roads, terraces, and cities hidden beneath the forest canopy, evidence that the Maya were even more interconnected than once believed. Excavations in sites like Holmel, Huitzna, and Noctin reveal the dynamism of the past, and local communities are increasingly included in their preservation and presentation. Climate change poses new challenges to Maya regions. Prolonged droughts, hurricanes, and shifting seasons threaten crops and livelihoods. Some see this as a cycle echoing the ancient past, when environmental pressures contributed to the classic collapse. Others see it as a call to blend traditional ecological knowledge with modern sustainability practices, restoring forests, diversifying crops, and protecting water sources. Education and technology are opening doors for new generations. Young Maya engineers, teachers, and artists connect ancient heritage with global opportunities. Digital archives of glyphs and codices allow youth to explore their history with a swipe of a screen. Festivals are live-streamed. Elders teach rituals through online workshops. Artisans sell crafts to buyers thousands of miles away. International recognition has grown as well. UNESCO has declared several Maya traditions as intangible cultural heritage, and indigenous councils are gaining more voice in regional and global forums. The revival of the 2012 calendar prophecy, though often misrepresented in popular media, sparked global curiosity about Maya cosmology and inspired renewed pride among the people themselves. The continuity of time, so central to Maya worldview, remains the unbroken thread. The long count has turned through Bactuns and Katuns, marking not an end but cycles of renewal. Each planting, each solstice, each naming ceremony is part of a living calendar that stretches from the builders of Tikal to the children of modern Quetzaltenango. Thus, the Maya today are not trapped in the past, nor have they lost it. They walk with it, on paved roads and jungle paths, in classrooms and marketplaces, under neon lights and starlit skies. They are farmers and computer programmers, weavers and activists, daykeepers and mayors. Their ancient cities may lie in ruin, but their culture is not a ruin. It is a river that has bent, split, and flowed around obstacles for 2,000 years, still running, still carrying its people forward. The story that began with maize and stars continues with migration and smartphones, with protest banners and sacred fire. Time for the Maya has never been a straight line. It is a circle, a dance, a weaving. And as long as there is someone to count the days, to plant the seeds, and to tell the stories, the Maya civilization lives, not as a ghost but as a presence.